Good morning, everyone. We'll call this meeting of the House, or the Advisory Task Force on Solid Waste to order. I might call on the clerk to please take the roll. We got to get our system plugged in and working right here. Give me a second. Normally, it's already turned on and logged in, but it's not this morning.
Okay. Ms. Donna Barrett is present. Mr. Kevin Brooks. Ms. Stacy Cawthorn is present. Mr. Greg Duckett is present. Mr. Doug Giles. Mr. Denny Hastings is present. Mr. Matt Harriman is present. Mr. Jeremy Hooper is present. Ms. Misty Kern is present. Mr. Michael Mallon is present. Mr. Scott Thomas is present. Representative Rusty Grills is present. Representative Chris Todd is present. Mr. Matthew Turner is present. Chairman Shane Reeves is present. Chairman, you have 13 members present.
Thank you for that. And at this point, we'll have just some opening comments. I don't know that I have anything for myself. I'll give this over to Chairman Reeves for any comments he has, and then also review of the topics from the previous meeting. Chairman Reeves. There we go.
Good. Good deal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Rainy December morning here in Tennessee. Glad to have such a good crowd here. Appreciate all the members of the committee making the effort to get here to Nashville. I never know when I leave Murfreesboro if it's going to be 30 minutes or 2 hours, but glad everybody's here today. And Mr. Chairman, appreciate your work in pulling together today's agenda. Wanted to read a couple of comments here if I could, then from the minutes from last time, and then make a couple of opening comments. Is that okay?
Please.
Is that good? So our previous meeting was held on September 30th. We had some introductory remarks from the chairman and from the task force members last month. We discussed the ground rules for our meetings as well as the statutory mandate for the task force as a whole. TDEC provided a presentation on waste infrastructure and volumes, and we discussed statewide data in regards to landfill capacity, recycling rates, composting activity, and hazardous waste management. Based on this presentation, we further discussed how Tennessee compares to national and global benchmark standards. The task force established the goal of getting Tennessee to a place where we lead the nation in solid waste management. Specifically, last time we said by 2050, we would like to lead the country in how we're managing waste in the state of Tennessee. We outlined a few obstacles last time we were together, specifically how we currently landfill capacity, new landfill sites. Last time we talked about the lack of public awareness really beyond some of the big pain points in the state. And we also spent some time about discussing alternative fundings of dealing with waste, which a lot of that's going to be handled today. And then finally, last time we heard from members of the public who are interested in this topic and had comments for the task force. And I'm glad today that we can keep the conversation going. And again, glad to be here. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. And at this point, we'll get right into our agenda. First, we have the Department of Environment and Conservation for their presentation on the recycling best practices and current inventory of recycling centers and landfills in the state. And will that be Mr. Jeremy? You take whatever position you'd like to present. Mr. Hooper is a member of the task force, and he can introduce himself and then the folks that are with you, and you're welcome to proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee. My name is Jeremy Hooper, and I'm on the task force, as said, and work for the department. I've got two folks with me that are going to help. I'm going to give a presentation over the items requested, but then I have to my left, Miss Amber Green, who is our manager of our materials management program at TDEC. So these are our folks that deal with a lot of different things: recycling, solid waste planning, and more important, I think that she's here today is she spent a long time. How long at the local level? 20 years. 20 years at the county level in Chester County, working on solid waste management and recycling. So she has a lot of great insight into that, and happy to have her here to help add some additional information and answer questions. To my right, we have Mr. Bill, who is with our materials management program, and he is a manager under Amber. Also spent how long?
11 years at Franklin County.
And Bill Anderson, by the way, I didn't finish his name. In Franklin County. So also has a lot of great insight and can help me navigate any questions, especially from the local level. So we'll get started. So the request was to talk about recycling and landfill infrastructure, sort of the inventory of it. So just sort of jumping in, talking about recycling facilities and programs in the state. There's a couple of different terminologies that you'll hear me mention, which is materials recovery facility. You often hear us refer to those as MRFs, the acronym MRF. And these are recycling facilities. So there are 16 that are permitted in the state. Not all these are permitted. And if they get a permit, it's a permit by rule. And I'll talk about that here in a few more minutes. And then we have another facility called a recovered materials processing facility. There's 21 that are operating. These tend to manage specific items: tires, shingles, construction and demolition. The MRFs, they can manage those things, but it's often also the plastics and the papers and a mix of things. Recovered material processing facilities are permit exempt, and I'll talk about that here in a few minutes as well. So some other stuff that we thought was really relevant to the discussion as it pertains to inventory and infrastructure is, what does recycling look like at the local level outside of just the facilities? What about programs? And you see here that based off the most recent data we have, so Amber and Bill's group receives data on recycling. And so the most recent data we have suggests that there are 64 municipalities that are known to operate a recycling program in the state. But I think it's important to note that most cities use either a county facility or participate in a hub and spoke program. So they may not operate their own recycling program. They may work with or utilize a county-based program. And TCA says that each county in the state is required to have at least one drop-off location for managing recycling. So take-home message of this slide: 64 municipalities participate or operate a program, and there are many that participate in a county-run operation, and those counties are required to have at least one drop-off location. So it was asked, these facilities that manage recycling, what are the requirements for them? Do they have to go through Jackson Law or local zoning? So a second ago, I said that recovered material processing facilities are permit exempt. They're conditionally permit exempt. So that means that they have to meet certain criteria, and TDEC does inspect them to meet that permit exemption. But because it's an exemption, there's no Jackson Law required for them or anything else. They just submit an application to us to show that they meet those exemptions, and we issue a registration to them. And then they're required to report to Amber's group annually the materials they manage, as well as how many. So earlier I said the MRFs can be permitted as a solid waste processing facility. So solid waste processing facilities are a permit by rule. They're not necessarily used for recycling. So a lot of our solid waste processing facilities, they don't deal with recycling. But where they do and require the permit, they are subject to Jackson law. So that's a distinction between them and the recovered material processing facilities. So some recycling is co-located. If someone doesn't have a recovered material processing facility or a solid waste processing facility, where do they take their recycling? The county has to have that one. These drop-offs are often co-located with another type of facility. So like a convenience center, which, as we talked about last time, are really important in our county, especially our rural counties where they don't have a citywide service. So that convenience center, for example, is where a resident in a rural county takes their waste, but many of them also take recyclable materials. So that is a facility that can take recyclable materials if it's set up that way. Those don't have to go through Jackson law. Those are pretty simple permits. And then zoning requirements, that's all separate from us. So whatever they have to meet at the local level, they have to meet regardless of what permit or exemption they have with us. So to show you where these are the MRFs. These are the permitted ones. So what do they do in the recycling space? You see here we've got receives, separates, and prepares recyclable materials. And they utilize a lot of different things. So think when materials come in, they often have to be sorted, right? And so these facilities will use different types of sorting options. So it could be mechanical, it could be human labor, it could be conveyor belt, optical scanners. I think folks are using like AI type stuff or looking into that. So the key here is the material comes in and it has to be separated somehow, to plastics, to paper or whatever, so that it can be further managed and prepared for market. And you see a list of the most commonly recycled items there. That's not exhaustive, but think about your paper, think about your plastics, your 1s and 2s, aluminum, metal, cardboard boxes. So those are the common ones you see at these facilities. Recovered material processing facilities. So again, what's the difference between them and MRFs? Often these facilities manage one unique item. So again, it could be tires, it could be shingles, it could be construction and demolition material. And you see there's not a ton of those. This is a relatively new registration process for the division. So there's certainly more out there that as time goes and we identify them, we make them go through that conditional permit exemption process. So this is certainly not all of them, but those are the ones that we have registered. And again, these facilities, as well as those MRFs, report that data to our folks to show what recycling looks like in the state. These facilities only manage recovered materials. So if solid waste comes through these facilities with recovered materials and they have to separate them, that has to go to that solid waste processing facility. So what makes them different in part to the solid waste processing facility is if they're recycling tires, all that can come there is tires. They can't separate it from a bunch of household trash. If they have to separate it from a bunch of household trash, that goes through the solid waste processing permit. And again, I'm reiterating that at the bottom because I think it can get confusing. Solid waste processing permit, recovered material. The key difference, recovered materials only manage those. Solid waste processing facilities can manage waste and recyclable materials. And I wanted to show you this because this is a relatively new thing that's on our website, and it documents this data that's coming through this infrastructure in the state. So Amber and Bill's team, they get all these solid waste reports. We call them annual progress reports or APRs. And it shows how much waste was generated in the county, how they managed it, as well as recyclables. This is now live, and you can look through this to see which counties or solid waste regions, how they manage recyclables, including the amounts. Some of those questions came up in our last meeting. And so this is a really good tool to say, hey, for example, Williamson County, what did they recycle? You can go on this map, You can click on Williamson County and you can see what kind of recyclables they managed and how much. And some of those numbers are here. So this came from our 2024 APR data. And I want to make it clear that this data is only as good as what's reported to us. Our folks try to make sure it's making sense and that the information's correct, but it is certainly only as good as what's presented to us. So this is data reported to us every year. This is from 2024, but some highlights here that I think are relevant. We're able to separate between residential recycling and ICI, so industrial, commercial, and institutional. Thank you. So you can see in 2024 what were some of the main items recycled in those categories. So for residential, you see paper, and this is in tons recycled. So you see paper being the most common, metal, and then single stream. So as a reminder, single stream means all the materials are lumped together. In the recycling world, you can bring it all in together and then you have to separate it, or ideally it comes in already separated. Single stream means it's all together. But take home message, they are some of the top items that are recycled from a residential perspective: paper, metal. And the same trend shows up for the ICI. So you've got metal being certainly high up on the list. You've got paper, and then the numbers sort of drop down where you see plastic. So a couple of points is to point out what items are certainly hitting the top of those lists, but also to say this is data that our folks get and they're looking through. So Mr. Bill and Miss Amber have only been with us for a little while, so they're diving into this more and trying to make sure that the information we're getting is solid and that moving forward, it's even better, because this is used for planning purposes for the local governments, so they can understand, how much am I getting? What infrastructure do I need? Where's this stuff going? And another interesting data point outside of just what items are these areas recycling, we also see what are some of our top recycling facilities, whether that be private or local government. And this is a list of them. So the far left column is the material. So you see paper, you see plastic, C&D, organics. And in the middle is the facility. So you've got Domtar up in Kingston, Eastman, WM or Waste Management, Severe Solid Waste. And then on the far right is the reported throughput or their capacity. So I think one of the things that's interesting about this data is that we get at TDEC is you see how much is recycled or reportedly recycled, but also how much capacity is out there in the state. And these are just some of the examples, not only examples of that, but some of our higher outputs for recycling facilities. So you guys have, I think we heard and talked about Severe Solid Waste and their composting. So they're clearly on the list here, and there's some others. Not only is this good for understanding recycling capacity in the state, but I think it's something you can point folks to and say, hey, how are they doing it? And how might we take some of what they're doing successfully and adopt it elsewhere? And then to sort of summarize the data, this table shows the amount. So the 4 million tons, it says short tons, that's just US metric. So 2,000 pounds a ton. So the top row is 4 million tons are reported to TDEC as having been recycled in the state. The middle row is how much capacity is left, how much more we could handle based off of the capacity reported to us. So based on those numbers, we could handle in the state another 1 million tons roughly. Again, these are based off numbers reported to us, but it gives us a snapshot to talk about. 4 million tons recycled in the state, another million or so available for processing materials. One of the items that was asked is recycling best practices. I didn't want to get too granular. I just looked at what are some common things you see from recycling best practices. And these are important. These are important for people to know, because if they get to a facility with recyclables and they're not meeting some of these best practices, then that material ends up in a landfill. So I think education, we talked about education, but this is really critical. Or else like I said, the material gets there and it can't be recycled. So among the most important things is for someone in an area to check what can be recycled. And Amber and Bill's team is one avenue for looking at that, but also reaching out, looking at their local government's webpage. But knowing what can be recycled and what can't is really important to the success of recycling. So for examples, in addition to knowing what it can be recycled, knowing how it has to be recycled. So contamination is a major issue for recycling. If items aren't kept relatively clean, dry, you can put them in the recycling bin all day and they can't be recycled. Not only that, but if what's in them contaminates the other materials, then that material can't be recycled. So contamination is really key, reducing it to the success of recycling. Placing items without loose in a can. Plastic bags get in and gunk up machines and cause a lot of mechanical issues and time to deal with them. So making sure folks don't put them in plastic bags is really important. And a couple other things. So I said plastic bags, contaminated items, but items that are really small also can cause some issues. Again, this is not an exhaustive, but just some highlights. And I think going along that education perspective, we can build upon it. I know Donna and their team and our team, that's one of the big things those groups do is making sure folks are educated on this. But when in doubt, we always tell folks to throw it out so you don't contaminate the recycled materials. And then lastly, we talked about this last time, but it was asked to talk about landfill inventory, and certainly worth mentioning if y'all are okay, keep going. So this is the same map y'all saw last time, and it's important. So I think hitting it again really drives home the message. So in addition to the recycling data that Amber and Bill's team get, our solid waste program gets annual engineering reports, and that shows remaining life of landfills. A key thing here, though, is in the state of Tennessee, we permit class 1s, class 2s, and class 3s. We only get annual engineering reports for class 1s, and then we get triennial engineering reports for class 2s. And I'll talk about class 2s in a minute. But class 1s are really important. These are the catch-all landfills. So they can take pretty much everything except hazardous waste. They can take certain types of hazardous waste that are approved by the EPA and TDEC, so household hazardous waste. So these are really important landfills. They're designed with synthetic liners. They have a clay liner under that. They're monitored for groundwater, air, but they take a lot of our household waste. And we have 29 operating. And as I mentioned last time, that number is declining over the decades. The number goes down. We have fewer of these that are larger, more regional in nature. So what is this map showing again? You've got colors, which is remaining life in years. And just like the recycling data, this is data that's presented to TDEC. So we try our best to make sure it's accurate, but it's only as good as presented to us. Green means the landfill has 10 plus years left of remaining life. Yellow, 3 to 10, and red, less than 3. So one of the things that we talked about and that's really led to this task force being created is Middle Tennessee, you see a lot of red and yellow. So we're having a lot of pressure on those areas. And while we have a lot of green in east and west, they're not immune to the potential impacts of Middle Tennessee's situation, right? So if these landfills in Middle Tennessee start to close, waste has to go somewhere. It can potentially go into the east and western Grand Divisions and start to impact the remaining life seen here. So just to keep things going, because I know there's a lot of presentations, these are the class 2 landfills. These are our industrial landfills, and there are 30 operating. These are pretty much industry specific. So if an industry obviously produces waste, it has 2 options. It can send it off to another landfill, or it can operate its own landfill. And some industries decide to operate their own landfill. So it's typically in their name. So the TVA landfills, the U.S. Department of Energy landfills, Eastman, Lodge Casting, those are class 2 landfills, and they're specific to that industry. So they don't take typically waste from outside of that industry. So they're important, certainly for our industrial sector, but they're not as important for the household waste, right? Now, I mean, listen, the class 2s, if they didn't exist, that waste would have to go somewhere. So they play an important role of not filling up other landfill space. And then the last one is class 3s and 4s. There are 52 operating in the state of Tennessee, and these are construction and demolition landfills. And they take that type of waste: construction, demolition, vegetative waste, and they are not, the regulations surrounding them are not as robust as the class 1s and 2s because the waste is not as much of a risk to the environment or human health. So they are, again, it's regulated similar, but there's some differences. They don't have to have a synthetic liner. They really don't generate a lot of leachate or leachate that is the same as the class 1s or 2s that can be very nasty. So this is the spread of the class 3s and 4, and they play a really important role because this waste can go to class 1s. And if these shut down, then they either got to go to another class 3 or they go to a class 1, which can take up valuable class 1 space. So with that, I know I ran through it, but I know there's a lot of folks and I can talk for a while. I'll take some questions. And like I said, I've got Amber and Bill, and they may want to add some really important things from the local level.
Thank you very much for that. Representative Grills, do you have a question?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Todd. I just want to go back and on the MRFs, how many applications for MRFs have been turned down, say, over the last 5 years, 10 years, or have you had any of those?
Mr. Hooper?
I'm not aware of any. I mean, from time to time, I can get back to you. I think from time to time, there have been some that have been denied by Jackson Law. I don't know that they were specific to recyclable materials, though. I can get back with y'all.
So, but Jackson Law was the reason that they were turned down?
In the instance that I think I'm remembering, yes, but I will confirm.
And I know we don't have time to go back and relearn Jackson Law, but that law was not intended to be in effect in perpetuity. It had a sunset on it originally, correct?
That's my understanding, that it was supposed to sunset at some point.
You remember when those dates were?
I don't.
Okay.
Happy to look into that and get back to y'all.
And we'll go ahead, Chairman Todd.
If you've got another question.
Oh, I've
go
got a
ahead.
bunch of questions, but we'll come back to those
Okay.
later on.
All right, anyone else? Okay. Mr. Thomas, you're recognized.
Hey, you had mentioned that a MRF could also be a solid waste processing facility, which implies that they might not be a solid waste. What is the distinguishing factor between those two? And could you give me an example of a MRF that's not a solid waste processing facility?
Mr. Hooper?
So let me talk about Chester County Solid Waste in the West Tennessee Regional Recycling Hub, where I worked for 20 years. So we were created from $9.5 million worth of TDEC grants that we wrote over a 10-year period. And we processed paper, plastic, aluminum, and cardboard. And then we worked with 13 cities and counties to process that material. And Ms. Donna has come and seen the facility before when I was still there running that facility. So that is the difference in the two. So counties collect their recycling and bring it to the facility, and we would weigh it in at the scales and then process it, and then we sell it, and it goes to an end user. So that's the program that I used to run at Chester County.
Okay, I understand, but what dodges the classification of solid waste processing facility?
So most of your MRFs are going to be a solid waste processing facility just because of the contamination that comes in as well. So it's almost impossible to stop the contamination coming in. So because of that reason, TDEC makes them get the designation of a MRF and a solid waste processing facility because you're still dealing with trash. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I had the idea that at some point, if there's anything that you have to separate out that is waste,
And that's
that
what
makes it a
causes it.
solid waste processing facility.
Their
right?
goal and the reason why they're there as a MRF is for recycling diversion, but they're going to get contamination, and that's why they have to have the permit. And that's the difference in the rum puffs that he mentioned. On the rum puffs, you usually aren't having any trash or contamination in there. Generally, it's tires or some other material, glass could be, and you're not having that contamination. So they don't have to have the permit then.
So if I understand correctly, for a MRF to not be a solid waste processing facility, it almost have to be pre-processed to separate out any
Absolutely.
trash or any other.
And then
anything
it's
that's-
probably going to meet the definition of a rum puff in that case.
Okay. Can I ask one other question? I also wanted you to distinguish between recovered materials and solid waste, because anything that there's an intent to dispose, right, is waste. So how do you distinguish between recovered materials and solid waste?
So our regulations have a definition for recovered materials, and that's the second bullet point there. So these are materials that have already been diverted. So say a stream comes in and it's got waste and recyclables. Let's just say tires, for example. Tires are pulled out. Then they're sent to a processing facility. So they've been separated from the waste stream already and then sent to another location. So these are materials that's all they are. I mean, we get it. There's some small amounts of stuff, and that doesn't preclude you from being a recovered material, but they've been separated from the waste stream.
Okay. So it's kind of similar to what we were just talking about.
Yeah, that's
There's a
right.
pre-sorting kind of.
Recovered
step.
means from the waste stream. So just think of the waste stream,
Right.
and then when they say recovered, it's pulled, just like Jeremy said, from the waste stream.
I think one of the confusion things is, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, Amber, but a lot of places just refer to MRFs as MRFs. But in Tennessee, we have MRFs and recovered materials. So it
Right.
gets confusing, like what's the difference? So that yeah, anyway.
So where would with this pre-sorting that I'm calling, where does that occur before it ends up going to a MRF or a recovered material facility?
It could be at a MRF, or think of it this way, especially at the county level, which is what I'm most familiar with. So we were operating as a permitted waste facility in Franklin County. We also had a recycling center. We pulled materials, or it was brought in from the public already self-sorted at the source separated, they call that. And tires is probably one of the best examples to use. So at that same facility, we had a location for the citizens and the businesses to bring their tires. They would put them in a trailer. So at that point, it now becomes a recovered material from the waste stream coming in from the public or the industries. And then it is sent to another location, which is most likely, if it's in Tennessee, it's going to be a rum puff. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it just sounds to me like what I'm calling the pre-sorting, that's a site or a process that's subject to the Jackson Law, right? So it's kind of a hurdle that recycling has to go over before you can go through the recycling process without having to contend with the Jackson Law at these facilities, right?
It can be.
Okay.
A lot, if I can just answer real quick. So a lot of your facilities that we have, you saw the 4 million number that was up there, the 4 million tons. A lot of those were done at the local level, potentially, that and the ICIs put together, the Industrial Commercial Institution. And that, let's see, I lost my train of thought there, but, well, I lost it. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to add, so every county has recycling, or the area that I was in, most of them had one place for recycling. So they would collect it and transport it to us. And then when it goes on our tipping floor, we would sort it like through an optical sorter, crossbelt, 80 current. And then we had robots, and that's how we processed the material. And then the contamination, so we processed around 7,000 tons back then, and it was anywhere from 12 to 15%. but we had worked on a recycling program for years, and all of those counties use the same volunteer to recycle program, and that helped with the contamination.
Yeah,
So,
and that
yeah.
sounds great, but that process you're describing is subject to the Jackson Law, right? The separation process?
That's what I was going to say. So a lot of the facilities are co-located. You'll have a recycling center of some sort at the permitted facilities. That's what I was going to say earlier.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
And Ms. Barrett.
And thank you for the explanations. I was the one asking many of those questions last meeting. First of all, can we get a copy of this presentation? We received the last one and I don't have this one. But I want a little more clarification on the MRFs that we currently have. I know I'm familiar with what Waste Management does in Nashville at their facility, but that's more of a single stream MRF to where you have those items that are recyclable coming in together, and then on the tipping floor, those recyclables are separated out individually. You don't have day-to-day garbage in there, correct? On the MRFs? Or how many of our MRFs actually commingle day-to-day garbage, or is it just a single stream
So that-
recycle items?
I don't know the specific number, but I will address what you said. So a lot of times the public will put their waste in their recycle bins.
Mhm.
So as it comes in, all that's got to be separated out. So if you're talking about what we call a dirty MRF, it's an actual term, look it up. So a dirty MRF, the contamination level could be as much as 50%. Ideally, the numbers for the MRFs, and if the community is doing it correctly, when we're talking about our residents, the contamination is only 10% and it'll come through. So you're probably at least looking at 10% is going to be solid waste that you're going to have to discard or get rid of, or it's materials that they can't very easily turn over to some kind of vendor or someone that's going to buy it. But the other material would be the solid waste then that's mixed in with it. Does that answer your question on that?
It does, and I wanted to give this body a little better explanation. It is not all solid waste and recyclables coming into a floor. It's where somebody inadvertently or
Yeah.
indiscriminately throws in a bag of garbage or something. The MRF is typically the floor where combined recyclables are then separated out.
Ideally, yes.
Ideally. And again, that goes back to what Amber's office, your office, and some of our other organizations are trying to do with the education on where to recycle and what can be recycled, which is huge in this issue. And I also wanted to clarify for everybody on and correct me if I'm wrong, but on the single streams, when you listed those collections, while that is a very efficient way to collect recyclables, glass does not come in on that. That's just not something you can bring in on a single stream. You can put your paper, your cardboard, your metal, your plastics, but that's not something you can dump on a tipping floor and then separate out. So when we're looking at collections and efficiencies for that, glass always has to be separately collected.
So glass is making a comeback in Tennessee, glass recycling. For a long time, it was a lot cheaper to throw the material away than it was to go through and any kind of a processing facility, a MRF or a recycling center. And there is a company that is in Middle Tennessee now that is making a really big push, especially with a lot of our counties, to start collecting that material. So.
Well, thank you for that information. And one thing that I've learned recently about glass in particular is that for the glass manufacturers, it is quite a bit cheaper for them to recycle glass than to make new glass, mainly because of the energy costs. So I'm sure we'll hear some more about that later today. But interesting tidbits you pick up. Anyone else? Okay. Ms. Cothran, you're recognized.
Just a quick comment, Jeremy, thank you. I know, and I'm glad you've got the APR numbers up here, and I'm glad you made the comment that your APR reports are only as good as the information received. And I think, one of the issues we've all talked about and looked at all of these years is the annual progress reports. When that information is gathered, I look at it as an opportunity because a lot of the industries across the state of Tennessee are collecting their recycling data, but it does not get onto the solid waste director's APR reports. So I think that is something that we should strive to work towards, to figure out how can we gather that information more. And I know we've been looking at it, but I think it's an opportunity that we can increase our recycling numbers by gathering that data. Thank you.
Mr. Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My family owns a tire recycling facility. We've been in it for 15 years and it's private owned. We did not have to go through the Jackson Law to get that done. You do not come on our lot unless it's a tire. That's all there is to it. And we don't store any tires outside. They're all stored inside. And if you come to our facility, of which TDEC's been to it, I think several times, there's not a tire outside anywhere. You wouldn't even realize it is a recycling facility. I think we run probably one of the cleanest operations in TDEC's in the state of Tennessee. So if I can answer any questions for you, I'd be glad to do that. I patented a process for the use of tires some 15 years ago for cleaning water. We take the tires and reprocess them and ship them all over the United States. We have national accounts like Walmart, people like that. Every time a building's built, they want to be able to clean their water on site and say we sell tires, but we clean water also.
Anyone else have a question for our guest at this point? Okay. Mr. Mallon?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation, and you covered a lot. I guess this is more just an ask going forward about layering out whether we're talking about municipal facilities or private sector. And ironically, the word mixed. I mean, we're mixing waste, but we're also kind of mixing the metrics and the statistics and the facilities that you're talking about. Because to get a picture of what 2050 is going to look like, I think it would be helpful to understand private sector, municipal, if there's anything hybrid. And then you also talked about waste volumes and then recycling volumes. And as we all know, unfortunately, some of the recycling becomes waste. Some of the waste could become recycling. So I guess I'm asking you to try to untie that knot. I don't know how to do it, but I think your team does. So thank you.
Any other questions for our guest at this point? And I know they'll be here throughout the day if something else comes up. Sina, thank you so much for that presentation. Very good information. And one of the things that we might look at in the future, instead of, or in addition to talking about tons, because I know that's the easiest way to measure most of this stuff, volume, because volume is really what drives a landfill. So if we had an idea, we talk about 3,000 tons of plastic versus 3,000 tons of metal, that's a lot of difference in volume. So it'd be good to have that at some point. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Next, we have Michael Hoffman with National Waste and Recycling Association to give an industrial recycling overview. And for these presentations, we're going to be looking at, around 8 to 10 minutes and then open it up for questions. So if you have questions, just make a note of them and either get my attention or Chairman Reeves or Rob's, and we'll jot down a list of who has questions. So if you would, you can turn the microphone on with the button and just introduce yourselves and feel free to proceed.
Thank you very much. Chairman Reeves, Chairman Jackson, Representative Newbern, and the committee, thank you for having us. To my left is Katie Evans, who is one of the 4 chapter representatives who works in the field representing the 28 chapters that make up the National Waste and Recycling Association. I'm Michael Hoffman. I'm the president and CEO. Who is NWRA, since you've asked us so kindly to be here to present? We are the industry's largest member-based trade association representing all things waste and recycling in the United States. And when I say all things waste and recycling, this table shows you it's solid waste all the way through medical waste. It's about $226 billion in total revenues. with solid waste representing a little less than half of that in the United States, or a little more than half, sorry, in the United States. I think things that are important to know, we're about 75% of that revenue base. So I think we have a voice with what's truly going on, both at the national as well as the state level. This is a capital intensive industry. And often we have these conversations and forget to talk about that part of it. For every dollar of revenue, if you're on the collection side, there's about $3 worth of capital tied up to do that collection. If you're in the post collection, so that would include your landfills, your recycling facilities, your digesters, you could be as high as $10 of capital for every dollar of revenue. So this industry has invested over $1 trillion in capital to facilitate the orderly, sustainable, and economically viable management of waste in this country. And then I think another derivative number that's very interesting is that for every direct dollar that we have in a marketplace, there's $3 to $5 of indirect revenue driven by us being in your local communities. At its simplest level, it's a driver stopping for lunch, all the way through buying tires and fuel and the like. The industry itself, if we're here to talk about solid waste, and I was asked by people who asked me to come in, I know it said industrial waste, but I was asked actually to continue to focus on just the solid waste business and then tie it back into the recycling. So I wanted to show you what this flow chart looks like on a national basis of moving this $110 billion. It's over almost 350 million tons. About 60% of it comes out of the home. Little more than 25% comes out of your favorite restaurant, your bookstore, your coffee shop, and the rest would come out of buildings like this. These would be what's known as large container. If we went back into the loading bay, there'd be a big rectangular closed box. The equipment that's used to do this, in the collection side and residential, you have a side loader, possibly a front end loader using something called a Corrado can, and then a rear loader. And we'll talk a little bit about the importance of that mix going forward and in achieving some of the state-of-the-art goals that you would like. And then on the commercial side or small container, that's front-end loader. You envision that. That's the truck that has the forks in the front. You lift it up and over the top of the truck. And then that industrial large container, it's called roll-off because the container rolls on and off in the back of the truck. What do we do with this volume? A little over 50% of it ends up in landfill. About 8% is composted, about 8% is waste energy, mass burn waste energy, and the rest is recycled. So we're in the high 20s totally on a national basis. I was asked to frame a little bit and help you understand what is the cost of doing business in solid waste. And we mentioned earlier that this is a capital intensive industry. So on a national basis, we have between 140 and 145,000 routed trucks a day. Why is that number varying? Because we're in this constant state of automation. You would take 2 rear loaders out for replacing with 1 side loader, or approximately 2. And we're in a constant state of trying to improve that from both a productivity as well as a safety standpoint. But a truck costs between $300,000 and $450,000. Depending on where it is, what it is, and the nature of the service. So that truck, on average, the fleet age is around 12, 13 years. So you can see some as old as in the 20s and then brand new. The containers that you use to service the industry, that 2-wheeler that you roll at the end of your driveway, it's $75. If you're behind that favorite restaurant and it's a 2, 4, 6, or 8 yarder, it's anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500. And then that big roll-off box that's here in the basement of this building, depending on the size and the nature of the compaction, you could be up to $10,000 to $15,000, depending on what that is. From a pricing standpoint in the business, at the household, and the residential business is priced on a per month basis at the household. And depending on whether you're offering both curbside trash and recycling, you will run between $25 and $50 a month. Today, what you'll see across the country where we have both services, that trash and that recycling service are almost on par as far as the cost, because it in fact takes that much money to effectively collect and manage a recycling program. And that's taken a long time to get those numbers back in par. The high dollar numbers are often in scenarios where we have concierge type service where the operators are getting out and going up in behind a house and bringing containers back, or we're in very high disposal cost markets like the Northeast, where we're over $100 a ton, or the Pacific Northwest, where we're over $100 a ton for your post-collection disposal at a landfill. From a recycling standpoint, I want to clarify, and I think it's important, if you want to accomplish your goal, I think it's important to get to a good set of definitions. So on the recycling side of the United States today, we have about 550 total facilities, but 330 of those are what are known as single stream. And single stream in this context means that at the curb or at the household, you have 2 bins, and you have chosen to purposefully separate the recyclables from the rest of the waste stream. And in the context of contamination, you will always have contamination in the recycling bin. At a minimum, the public, in its earnest efforts to be good recyclers, will stand there and look at a piece of plastic or packaging material and go, well, that's plastic, and put it in the recycling bin, when if it is a film or a multi-laminated plastic, it should not be there. In an ideal world, we would like, from our membership, if we could get to 10% contamination, meaning that's what the residual pile is at the end, you put 100 units in, and 10 of those I didn't have a secondary market. That would be, we would love that if we could get there. We're somewhere between 15 and 30, depending on where we are in the country. And you would be surprised in some places, Connecticut, 98% access to curbside recycling, 94% participation. They have a 28% contamination rate. There's a lot of wishful recycling going on. So we know that that level of contamination is always going to be there, and it's about communications. The other form of contamination, I think you heard a little bit from our prior panelists, what I'd want to define, it's the organics. It's the true trash part of the waste stream. And you truly don't want to commingle those, because then you will contaminate the things that could be recovered and ultimately sold, and in particular, the paper or the fiber. So if you look at the composition of the waste stream on a national basis, and Tennessee tends to reflect this, with a slight exception around there's a lot of tourism, and so there's a little bit more packaging container weight in your waste stream. But about 50% of the waste stream is fiber, predominantly OCC, but it's also all things paper. So this would be known as sorted office paper. But if I commingle everything else together, that's known as mixed waste paper. And when I'm in a recycling facility, I actually talk about paper as being brown, gray, and white. Brown sounds obvious, it's boxes. Gray is that mixed waste paper, and white, if you can get to sorted office paper, this is super high quality. You then get into the organics, depending on where we are in the country, 20-25%, plastics, 20-25%, and then metals and other make up the remaining percentage. And metals would be all aluminum and beverage cans, and then it would include glass at the low end. Why don't we want glass in our recycling stream? At its simplest level, it's sand, and it breaks, and it contaminates everything and gets all over the place. We encourage a separation of glass, but please don't put it in the recycling stream if what you want is a high quality, valuable secondary product, is to take that form of unforced error, if you will, on a contamination out of that waste stream. Many recycling programs that were restarted in the 80s, they built the success of them around weight, and the most heaviest part of the waste stream is glass. And so they were included. We're not dissuaded from glass, just that there's a better place for it. The challenge you have with glass, and we have some members who make a very good living recycling glass. Rumpke out of Ohio, it's a $100 million a year business. Why? You have an insulation business that's all within close proximity. So you want to move this as short a distance as you can, because it's extraordinarily heavy, and all transportation is based on weight. So if you can find a viable secondary reuse that's local, close in, then there's a great opportunity to capture that glass and reuse it. Otherwise, the success of a recycler program really rests on the quality and caliber of that fiber. On plastics, what we'd like to say, although we acknowledge that polypropylene is now an option, plastics with a neck. Plastics with a neck. Number 1s and 2s, your detergent bottles, your milk bottles, your water bottles. However, we have actually gotten to a place where the technology will let us get out polypropylene. That's your pill bottles all the way up to your yogurt cups and your cottage cheese cups. And so we're increasingly seeing an opportunity to get polypropylene out. And then all metal, we'll take all cans. Steel's food, aluminum is beverage. As I said, all fiber, and then candidly, nothing else if you were designing a perfect facility. We recognize that's not always going to be the case, and it's one of our challenges on a national basis is we have no harmonization from one town to the next to have harmonization in what goes into the bin. And as a result, we have confused the public to no end on what is truly recyclable. So as I go through and talk about cost, the one I want to share with you on this recycling side, if you build a modern MRF today, which is a true single stream facility, your objective is to be at 40 tons or greater an hour. Why? I'm trying to get the processing costs down somewhere in that 60 to 80 tons per hour. That facility is going to cost on the low end, all in building and equipment, not including the land, $1 million to $1.5 million per ton per hour. Well, I'm now into that $40 to $60 million for that recycling facility. Put that in context, if I build a modern landfill today, and we're not adding a lot of them, one, maybe two every 2 to 10 years, you'll spend for 1,000 ton per day facility, which would be on the low ends of the size of a private facility, you'll spend $150 to $200 million before you even put waste on the liner. And then you'll spend 10 to 15% of revenues on an annual basis in capital spending, with cell development cost as high as $1 million an acre, depending on where we are in the country and the nature of rainfall and the like. When you think of the other remaining piece of the cost on the waste energy side, there's about 71 facilities in the country. We've only added a couple basically replacement facilities. We haven't actually built a brand new greenfield in a long time. Sadly, the environmental lobby does not believe waste energy is a viable part of a solid waste management plan, even though in high dense population bases, they would make sense. You do not build them to produce electricity. You build them to have a close-in direct haul part of your overall solid waste management plan. The electricity ultimately helps offset the operating costs, but they're expensive. Again, if you were doing a 600,000 ton per year facility, or it's about 2,000 tons per day, which is in line with what a large privately operated landfill, MSW or class one in the context of the conversation earlier, site would take in, you're spending $2 billion. And your tip fees at that facility would be $60 to $140 a ton in comparison to the landfill, where as low as 25 and as high, depending on where we are in the country, like New England or the Pacific Northwest, $5 a ton. So when I think about the remaining two items of that waste stream and the opportunity for what might be next as a next best alternative versus a landfill, and I share with you, our membership every day looks at that ton on the back of its truck and it asks the question, is there a next best use? And to that end, I'll share with you later in this presentation the billions of dollars we've invested in recycling. What we need is something that works, that's scalable, and then does not require a long-term subsidy. We get that occasionally you would subsidize something to get it off the ground, but it has to stand on its own merits economically because subsidies go away. At some point, they'll disappear. And so you can't build something reliant on a subsidy on a permanent basis. So the organic fraction is the largest part of the waste stream that is the art of the possible. Could you do something different than putting it in a landfill? Let me be very clear. Landfills generate gas. By definition, the waste decomposes and it will generate gas. We're 45 to 65% of that gas is methane. That methane for years was converted into electricity. We were the number one, up until 6 years ago, we were the number one generator of renewable energy that was sold as baseload power into the grid in the United States because of that renewable gas, that landfill gas converted into electricity. In the last decade, the opportunity to upgrade that gas to pipeline quality has become economical. And you're now seeing that gas split between flaring because there's not enough to do anything else with it economically, electricity, and then pipeline quality. We've again made billions of dollars of investment in converting that gas into pipeline quality. Some future date, if we find ourselves fuel cells being a viable solution to a long-term electric powertrain as the fuel source, you could convert that methane into hydrogen. We're not there today. It's not economical. So if the organic fraction, which is now very successfully converted, the caloric conversion into that gas in a modern Subtitle D landfill, if you wanted to divert that, are there technologies that would let you do that today that maintain the same level of economic value of it, that aren't massively capital intensive, work scalable, and aren't requiring subsidies? At the moment, no. And we keep looking. And smart people someday will figure out how to do it. And when they do, we'll put the capital up. But at the moment, the most effective bioconversion of that organic fraction is in fact a modern Subtitle D landfill, what you call in the state of Tennessee a Class 1 landfill. They're civil engineering marvels. If you haven't seen one, it's worth the visit of just seeing the design and engineering. They teach this in engineering school today in civil engineering. You virtually do everything a civil engineer does is done in a modern landfill today. And that modern landfill has been in existence since January of 1994. And then lastly, on the recycling side, I want to frame what's happening in the United States. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about that and compare it to Tennessee in the next slide. So about 75% of the country has access to recycling. About 80% of that 75, or roughly call it 60%, it's curbside. The rest of that you have to drop off. The curbside participation is excellent. It's in the 90s, mid 90s. And candidly, the difference between access and participation is the day they were going and doing the study. Did you forget? Was your container not full? Were you on vacation on a business trip and therefore the container wasn't there? Our experience is a very high participation, and access and participation go together. Participation on drop-off is hit or miss. If the drop-off is within 3 to 5 miles of a home, it's not bad. It's in the 40s, but it's not equivalent to if it's curbside and you can roll it to the end of your driveway. If it's a greater distance than that, it drops pretty precipitously and we get into the 20% participation. The effort to go do it, because if it's not close and it's also probably not convenient from do you drive by it naturally, and therefore it becomes a natural part of a route. 25% of the country doesn't have access to it, and it's predominantly, these are less dense population bases. And it comes down to the economics of that collection. Remember, I have a $400,000 truck, a $75 container. You never weigh out a recycling route. You may pack it out, meaning it's full, you can't pack it any, but you never weigh it out. And therefore the math on this becomes hard to make it work. And is there a willingness to pay? Our challenge as an industry, and what we look at every single day as the association and the membership, is how do we improve that recovery rate in the places where it's available? So going into communities and talking to them about moving away from a drop-off into a facility-based model and therefore a curbside waste and recycling. And then where we're not there in these less dense population bases, what are alternatives? And we have, Katie's as a peer, Rachel Herring, ran a program in Texas where it was rural communities recycling. She had 115 communities where they had successfully developed rural community recycling, which was a combination of drop-off, but also supported by education through both the waste industry and the packaging industry. And the participation rate was in the 60s in rural Texas. So we know it can work, and we're prepared to get behind those efforts. And then ultimately, I think the recycling processing manufacturing side of the industry is working on technologies. Can you build small facilities that can operate in that 60, 70 ton an hour, and therefore be competitive so that you aren't reliant on the commodity to make them work? You can actually run it like a manufacturing facility, and they'll stand on their own merits. So let's talk about the comparison of Tennessee and the United States. And a couple key numbers that I think are worth talking about. I have to look over at that one because this is too small. I can't actually read it. So population, we're just under 340, you're over just over 7 million. What's the ton per person generation? On a national basis, we're in that 0.9 tons per person. Tennessee is higher. It's not a criticism. You have tourism. Tourism tends to drive that number higher because there's a lot of packaging and beverage containers and glass. As a result, tends to push it. So it's just an observation as you think of your numbers. When you think about what you do with the waste stream, as we already told you, there's about a little over 1,400 MSW Class 1 by definition landfills in the United States. There's about just under 600 of those are operated by owned and or operated by the private sector. It's 75% of the volume goes into those. There's an average daily tons per day or 2,000 to 3,000 tons per day. Where on the public side, that's a much bigger number, about 840, 850 round numbers, but they're 200 to 300 tons per day. More of those are closing faster every year, 10 to 20 are closing a year. They have not either planned for or chose not to plan for extended life through permitting, where the private sector, up until about 2019, successfully replaced the airspace they consumed on an annual basis through permitting. That's not true anymore. We are actually seeing a very gradual decline in permitted airspace as permitting processes have gotten more challenging. And so we're replacing it at a slower pace. And so every day we look for what's the next best alternative to that ton and keep looking for viable solutions. And recycling is one of those, and we'll talk about that investment in a minute. But when you look at Tennessee, as you saw in the last presentation, there's 29 Class 1, 24 of those are operated or owned by the private sector based on the governor's study from, it was the 2022 study. And then 5 of those are publicly operated. Again, on a size basis, the private operated are in line with the national average on size as far as tons per day, and the public ones are as well. Single stream recycling, in the definition that I used, which is this, it's source separated, where you're coming in with a dedicated stream. We've identified there are 15 facilities, of which 6 make up the bulk of the volume. It's about 450,000 tons a year. And the rest of them are relatively small and have picking lines on them. Definition matters here. So when you talk about the recycling stream in this state, some of the data gets commingled between MSW and C&D, gets bunched together. And then you talk about the governor's report talked about very high recycling rate, almost 50%. Almost all of that is construction and demolition debris. Your recycling rate in Tennessee from a standpoint of the actual MSW waste stream is low, candidly. It can be better. We'd love it to be better. That would actually prolong the life of the airspace through an economic diversion. Jackson Law does affect that, and to be able to permit sites, we're willing to put the capital up. We just need to generate a reasonable return on that. We'll charge a processing fee. Just to be clear, that processing fee is more expensive than the landfill by definition, nature of the capital investment. We try not to rely heavily on the commodity. You've seen that most of this market that we operate in, we've converted away from a commodity dependence. Although I would share with you in 2025, the commodity took the upside out of the public company earnings this year because we have a depression in plastics prices related to 2 things, China and the brands walking away from sustainability goals. Having said that, you can get to a place where you could create a model where everybody can participate on an economic basis. We'll put the capital up. We can operate it successfully. We can successfully create that diversion. It can help prolong the life of airspace, create a balanced portfolio. And I think based on the population density, you have almost 40% is urban, but you have mid-30s as suburban. So you have a high percentage of what would potentially be route density that would allow for that to happen economically. And then you do some composting in the state and no waste energy. I take a moment because I need to just share with you some priorities that are important not to lose sight of as you talk about these issues facing solid waste in this state. We have a battery problem in this country. We're not here to say we're not supposed to have batteries. Batteries are ubiquitous. But we have a public that does not actually know what to do with their batteries. And we have a fire every single day in every state related to batteries. Is this predominantly a lithium issue? Yes. But the fact be told that if 2 alkaline batteries with the knobby ends are touching each other and there's an accelerant nearby, there's enough energy in those batteries, you could create that thermal event. On the lithium side, that lithium battery is a chemical reaction. It goes to 1,300 degrees in milliseconds. It cannot actually be put out with water unless you submerge it and it stays submerged. So the ones that we see now in the news, particularly around in hurricane centers, EV cars, they get flooded. Then they have these car fires. Firefighters are not trying to put those fires out anymore. They're containing them because they can't. To get that fire out, I need an Olympic-sized swimming pool of water, and I have to submerge the car in the Olympic-sized swimming pool for about a half hour. You can't deliver that much water with fire hoses, so they contain them. We've had fires now in public parking and garage where EV scooters all the way up to vehicles burst into flames. Firefighters are no longer going into those buildings because it becomes an uncontrolled thermal runaway. So they're fighting that fire to contain it, and it basically starts with you're going to have a total loss. We lose one MRF a year in this country. Just very recently, a member had in Nashville a battery-related fire, and they were able to get it out and prove it was battery-related. So we need to get the batteries out. What have we done? We've licensed from the U.S. Forest Service Woodsy Owl. Remember, give a hoot, don't pollute? We did a study across the country, message testing to figure out where the public was. What we discovered is they don't know. That's the good news. We can influence behavior. What we found is if we said don't put it in the trash, they'll put it in the recycling bin. So what we've come up with is a theme called skip the bin, turn your batteries in. You go to our website, batterysafetynow.org. There's a zip code locator. You put in your zip code and it'll show you where to take it. And there's a retail outlet from a Home Depot all the way through to a Staples, Lowe's, Target, Tractor Supply. I'm not leading anybody out, just that's where you can go in, walk in, and drop your batteries off. And then our partner called a Recycle will separate those into the chemistries and we'll distribute them out into the recycling world. And they are managed through a proper end of life. They're not ending up in some third world country. The lithium, high level of recyclability, but even the alkaline, 8% based on material. Recycling. The composition of the waste stream has changed dramatically. If you go back into the 90s, you had newspaper in there. Today, there's hardly any. Today, it's predominantly cardboard. With it has changed and a modernization of the recycling infrastructure. In the last 6 to 8 years, this industry, predominantly my membership, has invested over $3.5 billion in modernizing the recycling infrastructure in this country. This is the movement into this 330 single stream facilities. We are about 250 of those just within the membership. And we'll continue to make that investment. We think there's another $2 to $3 billion of investment to continue that modernization steadily. What does modernization mean? You're bringing optical sensors. Optical sensors now have a near infrared technology where they can see the item, they can separate it, you spread the waste out on a belt, and then we can get to a level of mid-90s purity so that the end market is buying a very high quality. We have a challenge. China overbuilt chemical manufacturing. What are they doing? They're producing a PET resin, grinding it up, and shipping it into the country as recycled. So a virgin PET can be made at 8 to 10 cents a pound. China's shipping in here at 20. Our cost, domestic-based, collect it, process it, clean it, be able to deliver it back to being bottle to bottle, we're at 40 cents a pound. We get why Pepsi and Coke are struggling with this. This is a cost issue. They're fighting for market share every single day. If you want to influence this, and my next piece is why EPR is not the answer, content commitments. Because at the end of the day, cost matters. And what EPR will do, and there's the York University out of Canada, doesn't have a political bias, has analyzed the 5 provinces where this is widely now just operating and has shown that there is a 2 to 3x increase in the cost of recycling, no meaningful improvement in recovery, no improvement in design for recycle, no improvement in secondary market pricing, and no improvement in secondary market demand. Clear, irrefutable data. They're not politically biased. They did this on their own nickel, this type of analysis, the Department of Environmental Studies. It's a grocery tax. It cannot be lost on anybody that Gavin Newsom would like to run for governor or for president, stalled SB 54, which is their EPR bill. Why? It's a $10 billion cost to the consumer. And so he would like not to be governor if that ever gets signed and that, he leaves office in October or November of next year. So our recommendation is, and this, by the way, this is not that we're not for recycling. We're all for recycling. What we're for is stable demand in the secondary markets, content commitments. Set a minimum level content, set a level playing field. Everybody's in it together. There's no prisoner's dilemma between Pepsi and Coke on who's going to bear the cost and may possibly take the market share hit. And so we would recommend avoiding EPR, but go for content commitments and drive that secondary support. More importantly, as I already noted, you do not get 3 out of these things, and there's a maybe on do you improve recovery rates. The York University data actually says that they have seen a slight degradation of recovery rates in the 5 provinces that already have rolled the program out. And then lastly, bottle bills. There are 10 of them in the country. California's law allows you that excess monies that are not redeemed go back to the recyclers. Oregon and Hawaii, partial. The other 7, it's corporate welfare, goes back to the bottler. We've been trying to change that for decades. They fight it all day long because they'd love to get that money. How much? It's $1 billion a year. The public is not redeeming these bottles. But more importantly, what if you purposely chose to put that bottle in the recycling bin? Well, then wouldn't it make sense that if it's ending up through the recycling facility, that nickel, dime, quarter ought to come back to the recycler? Because that's where the true recycling has happened then from a redemption standpoint. We are putting it back into service. The bigger issue, extremely expensive infrastructure to put a bottle bill in after the fact at this juncture. And we'd suggest to you there are, again, better approaches to how do we get these items out of the waste stream into a recovered model and reused on a purposeful basis. And then the last thing I want to share with you is safety related. And this is in particular as you think about your long range plan, is to one, avoid take all contracts at the municipal level. That means you have to use a rear loader. If you're using a rear loader, it means there are people getting off the truck, walking around the truck. We are deemed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as one of the top 10 most dangerous occupations in the country. Now, we have some exceptions to the way they do their analysis because it's an algorithm that they make a bunch of guesses. And so we have paid to get a study done, University of South Carolina. They're analyzing the true fatality data for the last 20 years from DOT and OSHA. Here's some preliminary analysis. 87% of these happen on the route, and 70% of those are related to a rear loader. And sadly, 70% of those are the industry is doing something to itself. A driver isn't seeing somebody and they move and hit them, they fall off the truck, step on a step. So we know we have work to do. We own that. We're going to make efforts to improve that. But the flip side is if you put yourself in a position where you acquire a rear loader, we are knowing putting people walking around a vehicle. 30% of those deaths are the public hits us. It's distracted driver. So we ask that as you think about your long-range plan and you come up with your solutions, that you keep this in mind. The automated side loader is more expensive, but I would tell you, remember those 2 people pick up 10 tons of trash a day. They're pretty healthy and fit. So, if it's a municipal system, go put them in Parks and Rec, and I can show you mathematically that those people will get paid for by the productivity savings of the side loader. You don't have to fire anybody. We get pushback from municipalities doing the collection. Otherwise, from a safety standpoint, I've never had to make a call related to somebody being killed. I've had to make the call where somebody died at the office. I never want anybody to ever have to make that phone call. That is a hard phone call to make. Can you imagine if somebody's being killed because we're using a piece of equipment mandated by the contract where we have shown you from a safety standpoint we shouldn't be doing this? Let's do something different. And we would ask you to keep that in mind as you think about this. Any questions?
We'll open it up for questions. Mr. Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Recycling requires subsidy. There's no doubt about it. And you made a statement a while ago pertaining to how long do you expect to have subsidies before you can make it carry on its own? And then I have to follow up on that.
So I would tell you, I'm not trying to conflict. We operate recycling operations at a very economically sound level without any subsidies. And recycling in the context of MSW, single stream, we'll put the capital up. So the recycling business was stable, not high, stable secondary market prices, because they do still have some exposure to the commodity. These are 20% margin businesses, but they're high return on capital if I have that stability of that secondary market. Again, I don't need high prices. I just need stability in the price. I don't need a subsidy. What I need is a willingness to participate, meaning I come into a marketplace and that either subscription-based market, meaning you called the garbage company and said, hey, you're going to provide me my service, you negotiated directly, or the contracted base includes recycling and you're having a willingness to pay. And that willingness to pay is pretty much on par with whatever just the trash pickup would be. The recycling pickup is about the same. So you're in that $35, $40 a month. But for, $500 a year at $40 a month, round numbers, I've given you a permanent long-term disposal, environmentally soundly managed, and if you're allowing me to recycle it, I'm recovering materials. So I don't actually need a subsidy. What I need is a willingness for the community to participate in it. On the MSW side, I think on hard-to-handle materials, this is where it lends itself to EPR-like legislation, because you do need to create a funding mechanism to assure hard-to-handle materials start with tires are hard to handle, period, but we don't change them that often, right? So it's an infrequent disposal and then hard to handle. Those lend themselves to an extended producer program where that's helped supported by the manufacturer in the funding process to assure that there is a sound, economically viable solution to their management.
So the consumer has to pay you to recycle, basically.
Well, the consumer, somewhere
it's a
along the line,
subsidy.
the
That's a
consumer's
subsidy.
paying. Let's
Yeah.
just be,
Yeah.
let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
Either it's in your tax base or it's passed through.
A follow-up, and it's not a question, it's a statement. I was contacted out of Washington some 2 years ago about lithium hydroxide batteries and the problem that exists with lithium hydroxide batteries in automobiles. I did a study, and I'm a cycles person. I'm really into numbers. And cars have to be completely disassembled to get the battery out. Then you have to transport that battery, and that's extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. It appears that across the country, they're warehousing these batteries now and not disposing. It's only 2 or 3 that I know of at this time. It's actually doing the recycling of the lithium hydroxide batteries. We studied it. Just the first machine was $23 million. It has to be done in enclosed water, encapsulated. And it's a tremendous danger out there. So I think we have to put, just a comment here, I think we have to put some kind of recycling fee on these batteries before it's over with. We decided not to go into it because the danger it presented to the community of hauling these batteries in and the danger of the community of an explosion from these facilities. They have to be located in a rural area where there's nobody living close to it.
I don't dispute what you're saying, sir. It's a challenge. Lithium, it works. It's high storage capacity, and it's a filthy, dirty process.
Mr. Thomas?
What could you tell us that your perception is of the impediments in this state to recycling that might be larger or different than other states? Since your statistics seem to show we're behind the average in recycling.
So I think there's 2 pieces. On the residential side, it's the willingness to pay. And so it's where municipal governments have outsourced it. Are they prepared to make that conversion from rear loaders to side loaders? There's an aversion thinking, we've done it this way forever, and a take-all programs and bagged work. And our experience is, because we're now at about 70-ish% of the country has made the conversion to carts, and we're better than 50% where we're converted over to side loaders, in that high 50s, approaching 60. The places where we get the pushback are either an agency at the local level, typically, or politically, just because, the public, this is the way they're used to doing it. And between a cost savings as well as productivity, simply put, if I take 2 trucks off and replace it with one, it's less wear and tear on your roads. It's less traffic in your neighborhoods. And then it's extraordinarily productive. A side loader can do 12 to 1,300 lifts a day in a reasonably dense neighborhood. A rear loader is 600 or 700. And I have 2 people back there lifting up 10 tons. So it's predominantly a perception risk.
Have your members experienced regulatory hurdles or impediments that are
So in
different
this
than-
state, and I'm not here to jump on the back of the Jackson Law just because it's convenient. In this state, the Jackson Law has, we have 2 other states that have citizen-based groups that have some ability to veto up front. Both of those states, their equivalent of TDEC actually can step through and go, no, we need to do this. It's the right, and so they do. And so they have been less problematic, but I can't deny. And the answer to your question was 1991. Actually, it was supposed to sunset in 1991. And then it has been sort of rolled through since in extension language.
Thank you.
Chairman Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Toppin, appreciate the presentation. Can you go back to your slide, your Tennessee data compared to the national average slide? Had all that right there, that one.
I'm going to look at it this way. I can't
That's
read
it. So I
on
want to
this.
dovetail a little bit off Mr. Thomas's comments as well. When I look at Tennessee, on the tons per person and specifically the section at the bottom, we're 92% landfills, 6.3% recycling compared to the national average of 54% and 28% recycling on the whole country. Tennessee's not New York. We're not Connecticut. We're not Massachusetts. And we're 450 miles wide, 95 counties, a lot of rural up there, a lot of suburban up there. Can you point to a state in the country that looks more like us, that is doing a significantly better job on those recycling numbers that we might could think about?
Well, I'll ask you, so would Ohio compare?
Yeah, I would just think demographically and politically.
Yeah.
I think you got to run it through both those
Yeah,
filters in our
Would
state.
Ohio compare? Ohio's at 25%. So the success of that would be urban first, and then part of your suburban would have the density where the math works, and tends to have a willingness to approach it. This is not purely socioeconomic on at lower income just goes no. They will start with what's it going to cost. They have to make choices. But if you started at urban and you had, we're into the 90% on the urban side of participation, you change those numbers dramatically.
So
And
Cincinnati and Cleveland are doing tremendous jobs.
and Columbus.
Columbus, okay.
And so the big city centers are doing a very good job of that recovery. And we have state-of-the-art modern facilities. I mean, Rumpke spent $100 million building a 70-ton per hour facility in Columbus. Ultimately was able to prove they could get size is an issue, small things, hard to get them out. And they have gone back to Columbus and said, we'll take your polypropylene, we'll take your 6-inch clamshells because they can now get them out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Chairman Grills. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does Ohio have a similar law to Jackson Law?
No. No, it does not.
Is that a benefit?
Yes, in the sense of you're not starting with, could you have a no without having had an opportunity to lay out a proper feasibility and what's the outcome at the local level?
What other differences does Tennessee
I
have
think
in Ohio?
you start there and then politically, the commercial marketplace has a high volume of glass in it because of the tourism. And there's been a real resistance to participating in recycling programs around that. And then just the willingness from the local politicians and local waste authorities to say, we want to offer a bin service and start with bin, at least start with bin and change the behavior of put it in a bin and get it down to the curb in suburban and urban where that can be done. If you then gradually segue into the side loader. And in fact, if you get to the bin service, the companies will get to the side loaders on their own because they'll ultimately bring the productivity in.
Do you know what the total cost per ton to manage that is in Ohio versus the total cost per ton to manage it here in Tennessee is?
I could get you that answer. I'm not going to remember that.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. So Ohio's tip fees are in the $25 to $60 range, and Tennessee's are higher on the landfill side. The pure collection cost, the major change would be that you have a lot of rear loaders in this state. And so I'm at comparatively, I'm at 2x the cost of, and your conversation is at $6 a mile is what I'm sort of spending with a side loader, and I'm $12 a mile in comparison.
I also want to add about the differences between Tennessee and Ohio. I actually cover Ohio too. There is a strong relationship with the Ohio EPA when it comes to the siting and permitting of landfills and facilities and expansions. And the process to getting those through are a little bit different, and it takes more of a broader regional approach assessment for needs for the region versus the local determination and how that can play out.
Thank you for that. I don't see any more questions, so really appreciate this valuable information you brought. Ms. Barrett, you're recognized. I didn't have you on my list.
I'm hiding back here. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative, and a lot of what I've seen in the research that I've conducted over the last 6 years. I want some clarification on a couple of things. First of all, for those that weren't here at our last meeting, I did talk about us thinking outside the box, and really nothing needs to be off the table. However, there was a statement made that, with the difference between Ohio and Tennessee, and one of the impediments being Jackson Law. Well, as was pointed out in the TDEC meeting, we think, but we don't know with certainty, that only one of the MRFs or rum puffs may have been hindered by Jackson Law. So we don't yet know that that is an impediment, simply because we have something that they don't have. So I strongly urge that more research go into that before we say that that is a problem that needs to be addressed. Secondly, with all that you're talking about, I do want to make clear that when we look and talk about the recycling and that industry and the markets, we are talking about the need for clean recycling, separation at source, or single streaming, not everything going into a dirty MRF and then being automatically picked out, the good stuff out of the garbage stuff, as we see in some places like California where they're auto lines. We really have to have that differentiation between what can be recycled and it taken out first versus it all going into one big dump and then pulled out. You have no viable market or product at that point in time for any interested parties, correct?
Yeah, our preference is single stream, which means source separating in a single bin, commingle everything and we're having an MSW conversation. We're not conflating it with C&D and what have you. C&D recovery rates are exceptional, and you do a great job of that. But on the MSW, household waste streams, commercial waste streams, business, we would like to see a single stream, meaning I'm picking up a recycled content, processing that. Principally, you're not leaving the organic in there. That the organic becomes that definable piece of what we'll call trash at that juncture. Is don't put that in with the recycling. Just to be clear, there are dirty MRF is the term that people want to use. There are commingled recycling operations, modern facilities that are starting with commingled waste streams and are successfully getting them separated. They're more expensive. They're higher cost operating costs for tons per hour. You can do it. But if you want to know that you have a very high quality end product where you're not going to get refused by the buyer to take something, that's your risk, is they'll say no because they know you have a dirty MRF. Then you need single stream.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you guys coming today.
Sure.
And there may be folks that, Mr. Hastings, he's got one follow-up.
If you did not have to charge to recycle and you were subsidized some other way, how much more recycling do you think would take place?
Well, just to be clear, the scenario you're laying out, the consumer's still going to end up paying, because if the subsidy is going to come through either in the tax base, or it's going to come through because you're going to ask the producers to pay for it, and it's going to come back through in the grocery store, and the evidence is irrefutable. So I'm not sure that scenario exists. Having said that, I think the cost of this on a pure household basis, you're adding $400 a year. I'm not adding $4,000 a year per household if I add a viable curbside recycling program with the trash program.
My experience in dealing with people, if you ask them to recycle, it's hard enough to get them to recycle, but when they have to pay to recycle, different game. So if you have to write that check every month, it's different than if you were paying it, whether at the grocery store or some other way, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's there's a willingness to pay issue. There's no question. Our experience around the country is that there is a threshold. It's not as high as we'd like it to be, but there isn't actually a willingness up to a point, and then you get to that point and go, oh no. But if you want a successful program, we ought to be honest with the public what it costs, and if you want to subsidize it because you fund it through the tax base, great. But at the end of the day, the success, we've not been honest with the public on a national basis. That's why we don't have harmonization in what we're collecting, and we have massive confusion. They just don't know.
On that point, you mentioned $400 a year. Is that in addition to what they're paying, however they're paying for their generic trash?
If you don't have curbside today, the additional cost is almost on par of whatever your monthly rate is today. And if you don't have curbside today, my guess is that in the state of Tennessee, you've seen some rates in the high teens, but they're in the 20s per month, where it's just the collection route. If you're in reasonable densities, if you're in poor densities, that number for the trash is going to be at $30 just for the trash, because I've got a lot of windshield time and the cost of just getting around the route. So you're going to add $15 to $25 per month for the recycling, depending on your density.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mallon.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. And this slide is fantastic. The waste to energy, obviously none in Tennessee. And there are a couple of thoughts that I have. One, you mentioned earlier that if I'm quoting you right, the solid waste lobby opposes waste to energy.
The environmental lobby does. The environmental lobby does.
Okay, which leads to my next comment, which is the leftovers. And when you say batteries are ubiquitous and becoming more so every day, what cautions would you offer in terms of whatever direction the state of Tennessee thinks it should go in terms of the leftovers and the things that aren't solid waste anymore but become hazardous waste or become RCRA regulated?
Well, okay, so if I understand correctly, in the MSW waste stream, you could get to a place where definitionally under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, Subtitle C, something would be potentially deemed hazardous, I suppose, if I isolated it. And all of your household products under your sink, by definition, are probably as a listed or a characteristic waste would be hazardous. They're just such small quantities. They've never regulated them that way at the household level. I would avoid going there. You would introduce a level of confusion to the public, and they are extraordinarily small unit volumes relative to going into the waste stream. I think if you're asking me the question as this task force, there's no one size fits all solution. You want to look at this holistically as a combination of pathways, and there will be different solutions in denser populations and less dense population. And what you should know from my membership standpoint, we have a willingness to put capital up. We just need to generate a reasonable return on that capital. So, give us a contract structure that at least gives us stability of time, if not unit price, or if you make it short, then good enough unit price that I can recover the capital, be willing to take the risk. The waste energy comment is telling. We have two places in the country that had waste energy, had fires or shut them down. went out looking for the special sauce approach to a solution. One's Miami, one's Connecticut. Nobody showed up because they weren't willing to put the capital up because they were being asked to do something that was impractical. But if you come at the industry with a practical combination, we'll put capital at risk and provide that solution. But it's a mix. It's always a mix. There's no one size fits all. At the end of the day, you should be able to successfully get your landfill volume down to something in the 50 or 60% range, and your recyclables in the mid 20s or higher. Composting only works if you have commercial agriculture, predominantly fruits and vegetables. The public can't absorb all the compost. There's not enough trees and shrubs around our houses to absorb all the compost. So you need commercial agriculture to absorb compost if you're going to do it at scale. And, should Nashville consider waste energy? Possibly. It's big enough. It's got enough volume. Can you get it through politically? I don't know. But is it a viable solution? It's a direct haul. You stop shipping long haul, wherever it's going. But it's $2 billion. And there are developers out there who would put the capital up, but they have to have a viable long-term plan.
Once again, thank you for sharing this with us. Extremely valuable information. And we will, if you don't mind, we'd love to make sure that the presentation is available to our members.
Yes, if you would do that as a PDF for me, I'd appreciate that. I think I gave it to you as a PowerPoint, but.
Okay, we can certainly share it from that. Mr. Duckett, I think had a question.
Oh, sorry, sir.
Thank you. My question was going to be earlier, you made a reference to what I will refer to as a financial threshold that the consumer user might be willing to bear. From your experience, can you give us
So
an idea?
it's always got a low as zero. They start and they kind of tongue in their cheek go, wow, nothing. But that low number tends to be $8, $10, and the high is $20 a month, depending on where we are in the country. And we're basically 2x to 50% too low, depending on the end, on what the real costs are. If we're going to charge what we should charge at the collection side and what reflects the true operating costs, you're somewhere in that high teens to high 20s, low 30s, depending on the demographic, the density of the collection route, and the like. Windshield time's expensive. We're $3 for diesel, so it's expensive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Again, thank you so much for being here, and I'm sure folks will be able to use your contact information you've already provided to get in touch with you for some follow-ups.
Thank you for having us.
At this point, I do want to mention that when we put the agenda together, we didn't really have specific timeframes because we knew some would take more than others and be more questions on some. And so I want to offer at this point, anyone that's on the list for presentations today that cannot be here this afternoon, we can bump you up in the list if we need to, because we got a hard break at 11:30. And then we're going to come back at 1:30 and kind of pick up where we left over. So I do see one that would need to present sooner than later. Mr. Holland, would you be willing to defer? Okay. You come on up, sir, and I think that microphone is still on, and you're welcome to use that.
Perfect.
Just identify yourselves, and then there's a presentation that you may already have it. Yeah, you've got it ready to go there.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, we appreciate you all having us here this morning, and thank you for letting us bump up. I'm Mitchell Salisbury. I work for Omni Metal Recycling. We do have locations here in Tennessee, but I also serve as the president of the Tennessee Scrap Recyclers Association, and we are the state level for the Recycled Materials Association, REMA. Also have Andrew Rice here with me. He works with CFC Recycling, president of CFC Recycling here in Middle Tennessee, and he is our past president. But asked him to join us as well. So I will go ahead and jump into it, and I'll try and keep some things brief. America is made with recycled materials. Nearly 75% of all aluminum ever produced is still in use today. And then over 2/3 of a car is made with recycled material. What makes for successful recycling? Demand and markets have to have somewhere to go with it once it's produced or once we've got it through our process. We have to have the infrastructure to be able to do so. We have to have the ability to move the material, the roads, the equipment, the processing facilities, but then the technology that continues to get added in. When we've looked at recycling in the past, people look at things and we've evolved. We have people that have mentioned optical sorters, sensors, robots. We're not just putting things in a pile these days. We actually have to sort that material and make it make sense. And then when it comes down to the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we can do it efficiently. We have to make sure that there's value there from that market demand. And we've got to be able to sell it and make a profit from that. Recycled materials industry, economic impact in Tennessee, there's about 18,000 jobs and then $5.18 billion economic output and $527 million in tax generation. This is just a breakdown of the jobs. Again, right at about that 18,000, direct 5,000, supplier 7,000, and then induced 6,000. Recycled materials, and this is in the United States. Two big numbers that really jump out there: the iron and steel right at 65 million metric tons, and then the recovered paper and fiber 41.7. There's a lot that falls in between there, different commodities, things like that. But all in all, about 134 million metric tons. Of that, about 23% does get exported. Looking at the share of total recycled volume, only about 30% of that does come from the curbside. So what's being picked up on the side of the road, and then about 70% of it's coming from an industrial commercial use. So we do see a tremendous amount coming in from the industrial companies through production or what have you. Focusing on the steel side of things, mill trimmings is the lowest, about 18%. And that's just what's being reran at those facilities. When we look at manufacturing, 24%, and that's what may come from a vehicle producer, a stamping plant, someone who's making a product. We're getting material from them. And then 58% is coming from a post-consumer. So meaning us. After, at the end of the year, something goes bad, we have a refrigerator that goes out, that's going to go through the recycling process. Recycled steel recycling rate, automotive, nearly 100% of all vehicles are recycled at the end of their life. 98% of structural steel from construction and demolition gets recycled. 88% of steel appliances are recycled, 71% of rebar, and then 70% of steel packaging makes it over to the recycling facilities to be processed. And I should say that companies that are in the steel recycling industry, within about 90 days of a piece being dropped off at a recycling facility, it's made it all the way through the recycling process, through the steel mill, and is being made into a new product and out into the world. Aluminum recycling, 47% comes from secondary, and that's from the manufacturing facilities. 16% is going to be a primary production. So it's going to be at a facility where it's never seen the likes of day. It's going to stay there. And then 37% coming from end of life. Okay. So that is a little bit of a breakdown of where those aluminums are coming from. 84% of the volume of aluminum produced in the U.S. in 2024 was produced by recycling existing aluminum. If you look at what it takes, it's about 5% of the electrical or any kind of resources power to produce. So we do want to make sure that we are recycling. And we do not have any property loss when it comes to aluminum. It is infinitely recyclable. Looking at the recovered paper and fiber, containerboard makes up the majority of what's there. All in all, about 46 million tons in 2024. Again, this is across the U.S. If you're able to recycle cardboard, you see about a 60% reduction in energy, the cost and what it takes to produce material. You also reduce greenhouse gases by about 40%. And then recycling 1 ton of paper saves about 3.3 cubic yards in a landfill. So pretty good statistics there and keeping things out of the landfill. Plastics, and this is again, United States wide, 5 billion pounds of bottles, non-bottles, rigid plastics, films, and other things do get recycled in the U.S. Across the board. One thing we did want to talk about briefly, PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are things that are being added. These are organic compounds that are being added in. There's a lot of conversation on this topic across the United States. But what it is, it could be an additive that's put into cardboards to make them oil resistant or help the properties there. Or it's a nonstick surface that's added to a cookware. Could be a stain or water resistance that's added to carpet or clothing. But they're out there. It's an organic compound. We, as a recycling industry, we're passive on this. Okay, it's not something that we're creating. It comes to us, and it's something we have to deal with. And so it's something that we're monitoring closely, but we are passive receivers, and it's something that I think we'll continue to see popping up. One last thing I did want to share with you all. We were originally known as ISRI. Okay, we've recently rebranded to REMA. But if you look online and you can follow this QR code, the ISRI specs book outlines the different names of scraps, the different, or I shouldn't say scrap now, recycled materials. Categories. Yes, thank you. Of what those materials are. This is out there. It is a reference. Right now, we're trying to figure out what we call it, because in a lot of legislation, people refer to the ISRI specs. And so we're trying to figure out how to rebrand that and what that's going to be in the future. But that is there as a reference for you all. And then I'd like to ask Andrew, is there anything else you'd like to share with the group? All right.
Interested in questions.
Yeah. And I'll leave it at that and ask for any questions.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate the volume of information you presented very concisely. It was done very well. Any questions or comments for our guests? Ms. Barrett?
Just one clarification. I've been to the specifications site, and my understanding is those specifications are what all the brokers and recyclers have agreed to accept as the items that, if they're in the industry, they are adhering to those REMA specs that are listed, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Kern?
Just some clarification on the PFAS. Items that are treated, they cannot be recycled if they contain that? Or how does that work?
So they can be recycled, and that's something we're going through. What people are looking at is, what is harmful for the environment. And they're trying to add regulation. What we want to make sure of is that we can still continue to recycle those, and we don't get bogged down in some kind of legislation with that. Yep.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very good point. Hearing a lot of things about that, but there's just so much unknown about it too. That kind of helps get it to, for me at least, in a box a little bit better from the conversation standpoint that we have here today. So seeing no others, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure you guys will be available for follow-ups if anyone has them.
Absolutely, and we invite everyone out to one of our facilities if you'd like. We can find someone in your area and bring you out for a tour. Thank you all.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have Mr. Richard Holland of Packaging Corporation of America. Mr. Holland is a regular in this room during the session. We appreciate his involvement and appreciate him being here to share this with us today.
I may have to call a friend to get my presentation up here.
Can you, is it on the screen?
Yeah.
Can you double click it?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
And I don't seem to be having any success at it. There it comes up.
Okay.
Good deal. Yeah, finally. Okay, thank you. Richard Holland. A little bit about my background. I worked for 15 years with TDEC, so I saw the solid waste industry as a regulator. Then I went to Packaging Corporation. I was the environmental manager there for 25 years, and then for the last 5 years, I've been doing other projects. So have got quite a background in the solid waste area. I also, for at least 20 years, have served on the Henderson County Solid Waste Committee. So do have some background there. We've been talking about data. This is from our trade association that we show how much paper is being recycled. Cardboard recycling rate, they show it's 78%. So a lot of cardboard gets recycled. To go on to some more specifics in the paper industry, you saw some statistics, I think, in Jeremy's presentation about Domtar up at Kingsport, how much cardboard that they recycle. We recycle about 100,000 tons a year. That's just a picture of the bales of cardboard that we have at our facility. There's 3 paper mills in Tennessee, combined with us and Hood Container and Domtar, totals up to about 1 million tons of cardboard that we bring back into our facility. Domtar at Kingsport is 100% recycle. Our recycle content is somewhat lower than that, but PCA has 10 paper mills across the country, and it ranges from a low of 10 to 20% recycle content up to a high of 100% recycle content. So quite a bit of recycling goes on in Tennessee. Just commented about, we talked about how to collect cardboard. Like I said, the 2 counties I'm familiar with is Hardin County and Henderson County. And both of those counties rely on convenience centers. There's just an example of what Hardin County does to collect it. There's Henderson County is kind of plain. We just have trailers and we collect cardboard. You know, I've noticed being on the solid waste committee, visiting some of our convenience centers. All of our convenience centers have a place to recycle cardboard. And I've observed people, you know, they drive in and they'll throw their bag of garbage over into the compactor, but their boxes, they'll put in the trailer. So I think people want to recycle, that they want to do it if they've got the opportunity. So I hope that's one of the things that y'all can help us with, is that every community, every area needs to have a place to recycle their cardboard. Talk about just some specific issues to us. That's just a shot of our facility there, but some of the things that we do is that we try to recycle everything we possibly can. Scrap metal, talked about aluminum cans, all that. The only thing we have failed at is plastic water bottles. You know, when COVID came along and we had to shut down all of our drinking fountains in the plant, and we started buying lots of bottles of bottled water. And we collected them for a time. We spent a lot of money on putting, you know, containers in various areas of the plant so that employees could drop them in there. And we either didn't get cooperation from our employees, or what we did get, there was no market for it. So we have not been able to do much as far as recycling plastics within our plant. But we do work on everything. Scrap metal, large quantities of scrap metal. We use the 40-yard roll-offs all through the plant. We've got areas where people can put their aluminum cans in and reuse them. I want to talk about just for a second about some of the specific things that we have that we generate in our plant. And we have our own Class 2 landfill on site, so we can landfill our material, but we do not want to. We want to make that landfill last another 100 years if possible. So we want to keep everything out of it that we possibly can. Wood waste, and this leads on into a little bit more here in a minute. We have to take the bark off the logs that we process to make paper. So we burn about 2,000 tons of wood every day in our boilers, and we generate steam. We make part of our own electricity, and then of course the steam that goes into the process. But when you burn 2,000 tons of wood every day, you generate a lot of boiler ash. On the left there is a picture of our ash that we generate. This is wood ash. This is not coal ash, it's wood ash. And so we have 2 choices. We can either put it in the landfill, which we do not want to do, or we can go through TDEC and get it declared as a beneficial reuse material. And so that's what we have done, and we are using it as construction material. The shot there on the right of that picture is the boiler ash down there in the bottom. We had a low area valley there on the plant property, and we wanted it leveled up. And so instead of hauling in dirt, we're using the boiler ash. On the right of that picture, the bank there, embankment, that's where we've already filled, and then we're starting to come up with another outfit there. You can see the amount of material that we generate there, 65,000 tons every year of this material. Again, we want to keep it out of the landfill. We have construction projects on site that'll last us, another 4 years, maybe 3 years, probably. And at that point, it's got to go somewhere. And at the end of my presentation, I will tell you what would like to talk about on that issue. Other thing that we have a lot of is our wastewater solids. When you make paper, you want a long fiber to make the strength in the paper because we're making cardboard boxes. And so we want a long fiber. Some of the fibers get kind of chewed up in the process, and they just have to go down the drain with the wastewater. That's a picture of the trench where it conveys the water from the plant into our wastewater treatment system. And you can see the brown color there. It's got a lot of wood fiber in it. It goes into a settling lagoon, which is really not a settling lagoon because the wood fibers float to the top. What you can see there on the surface is a crust several feet thick that this material accumulates with. We go in there every year, drain the water off of it, go in with front end loaders, dozers, track hose, and we load that material out. And on the left picture there, we put it on drying fields. We got just, flat area, and then we put it on there. We run it through with a dozer. We do this in the middle of the summertime, not in the wintertime. So we just use the sunlight to dry this material. And we get it to about the consistency of topsoil. If you've gone to Lowe's and bought a bag of topsoil, that's about what it comes out to be. And then we're using that for land application on cropland, on pasture land. But again, for every farm that we go to, whether it's a couple of acres, whether it's 10 acres, 20 acres, we have to go through TDEC to get a specific beneficial reuse permit to do that. And at a big facility like ours, we want to try to conserve our landfill space as much as possible. So here's my kind of takeaway that from the paper industry standpoint is that boiler ash, wood ash, is a good lime substitute. It has a pH of about 10 to 11, so you can use it in place of lime. And the solids, the wastewater solids that we generate, has a very high organic content. So it's great for soil. If you got a sandy or a gravelly soil, this stuff will grow grass like crazy. So while it's not insurmountable for us to go through TDEC to get a beneficial use determination of this thing, it is a little bit time consuming and for both us and TDEC. And it would be great if this materials, and not just from the paper industry, but other industries too, that we could look at, could be classified more as a soil amendment, and whether it would take it out of the regulatory process as having the stigma of being an industrial waste product, that it could be considered more of a soil amendment. So I would hope that out of this process that you all go through, not only looking at municipal landfills and commercial landfills and residential waste, that also some industrial byproducts that have good uses and could, like I said, maybe be taken a little bit out of the regulatory procedure and just be classified through either Department of Agriculture or TDEC as a soil amendment. And that would give us a place to use this boiler ash that we have and the wastewater solids. Because if we aren't able to use it on the land as a reuse product, then it's got to go into a landfill. And again, even though we have our own landfill, we don't want to put anything in that landfill that we don't have to. So thank you for listening to me this morning.
Excellent, sir. Appreciate that. Representative Grills, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Richard, that wood ash, just how much of that do y'all have to put into the landfill annually?
Right now, we're using it for construction material. So we've got one big low area on the plant that we're using it for, but that's going to be filled and completely leveled, like I said, by about 28 or 29. And at that point, we've got to have something else to do with it.
As a farmer and someone who's lived on a farm his whole life and in the farming community, I can't imagine that you don't have farmers lining up to use this product. And what would prohibit you from using that now is just TDEC?
Well, I mean, it has to be specifically permitted as a beneficial use material. So like I said, it's not an insurmountable process to go through it, but it would be a lot better if it could be just considered like a fertilizer and
Absolutely.
we just make it available and the farmers use it.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, if you can't find anybody that'll take it, you can bring it up to Dyer County and I'll find a place for you to put it out. But I can see such a huge benefit there. And I think this is one of those things that really thinking outside the box and taking advantage of every opportunity we've got is one of the things that can really make a huge impact. So
Again,
let me know if you need something legislatively done, Jeremy.
Good.
Whatever we can do to make this happen, though, that's one of the things that we definitely want to make sure it's done.
Like I said, right now it's valuable to us as a construction material because we'd be hauling
Oh,
dirt
so you want to
in
sell it to
level
us now?
this. So we want to keep it for ourselves right now. But that's why I'm looking down the road is 3 years from now. Yeah, I need to haul it to your farm and put it on there for fertilizer.
Thank you.
I think that's a good suggestion for us to look into and talk with TDEC about is if that could be reclassified, to get the material classified and instead of the location
Yeah.
being permitted, that the material meets this qualification, then it can go wherever you want it
More of
to.
a permit by rule type
Yeah.
thing, that if it meets the qualifications, then yeah, it can be done.
Mr. Hooper, since your name was called.
Yeah. Appreciate and appreciate working with Richard on
Yeah,
this.
and Jeremy has worked very closely with us on all that.
And just so we've gone through this question with other materials that are land applied, which is valuable because it keeps it out of landfill. Just for everyone's awareness, as this conversation keeps going, we looked at, so the Department of Agriculture, I certainly don't speak for them, but I learned this through working with them, that their soil amendments and their fertilizer license, as I understand, are only applicable to materials that someone commercially sells. So that's something that we would have to discuss on how all that stuff works out, but just for awareness.
Mr. Mallon?
Thank you. As an environmental lawyer for 40 years, you've hit just the crossroads that pragmatically comes up, which is you've got an industrial waste, which is a special waste,
Yeah.
which can be beneficially reused. And to get from there to here, you've got to solve the puzzle.
That's it.
Which
Absolutely.
all due respect to the regulators, but
Sure.
it makes it challenging. From the time that the ash is created, after I guess it cools,
Yep.
is to the time that it's land applied for fill, let's say fill on your facility, does it have to be tested? Do you have to give any laboratory results to TDEC?
We do. We absolutely do. I mean, we test it at least once a year. And for metals, anything in it, mostly metals.
That's what I was going to ask, is it for heavy metals?
Previously, we burned some amount of coal. And so it did have a little bit of coal ash in there. So that was some of the concerns about the metals. But we have eliminated coal now. So it's 100% just wood ash.
So that's the magic of it, is if the product in is purely bark,
Yep.
and poison ivy or whatever
Yep.
else is in there, then the product out is free from hazards.
Exactly.
From hazardous
We have
substances.
never found anything, above any concern levels whatsoever in the metals.
That moves the meter for me a lot more than when you start talking about municipal sewage and sludge and all the political lightning rods and health issues around that, as opposed to tree bark. So
Exactly. I mean, there's other materials that can be land applied, but they have issues, just like you said, municipal sludge and the PFAS and the things like that. But
well,
again,
that's what we've
this
got to
is
find.
100% wood ash.
We've got to find beneficial reuse that doesn't have what I said before is the leftovers, because it's the leftovers that
That's true.
create the bad result. Thank you.
Mr. Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any idea what the weight density on that product is?
It's about 1,500 pounds per cubic yard.
For the last 3 years, I've been working with Dr. Buchanan at the University of Tennessee, who's head of the soil science department.
Yeah.
Do you know him?
I do not. I know some other folks up there, but I
He-
don't know him specifically.
He is the chief advisor to TDEC
Yeah.
on septic systems. Tennessee has a real problem with septic systems in our rock situation that we have here in soil. We've been working on a system to where we can import material where we don't have to meet the 24-inch depth requirement on soil. Get with me after this, we might can incorporate what you're doing with what we're doing to be able to eliminate some of these septic systems across the state of Tennessee.
Good deal.
Ms. Kern?
Thank you. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned several facilities. Do all of those produce this ash?
In general, in the paper industry, yes. In Tennessee, all three, the three paper mills in Tennessee, they do.
Okay, and-
I know that one of the facilities has their own landfill and they just landfill it. The other one has a commercial outside landfill.
Okay,
But I have to say that we are the largest of the three paper mills in Tennessee. So we generate a lot more than they do. So that's why it's more of a concern for us than it may be for Hood Container or Domtar.
And just a second part to that. So last year, of course, in October, a big part of Tennessee suffered from Hurricane Helene, as well as our neighbors in North Carolina and Virginia. Would there be an outlet to help them rebuild some of their farmlands that were flooded by using this material?
I think it would. Of course, transportation is the big thing. You know, we have had inquiries before from clay mines to where they're having to reclaim mining areas. Of course, clay mines are very low pH, and this is a higher pH material. So could it be used for some things like that? So there's been several things suggested that we're going to be looking at over the next 3 years when we run out of space for the construction material.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Holland, I had a couple of things I jotted down from the previous presentation about cardboard specifically. And some of this may have come from you as well, but 1 ton of cardboard equals about, I think it was 3.3 cubic yards of volume.
That
Think
yeah,
that-
it was mentioned a while
does that
ago.
sound about right?
I wasn't aware of that
Okay.
statistic.
And also there was a comment about using less energy to recycle cardboard versus make it from virgin wood. Is that?
And that is true, I
Okay.
have to say. In PCA, we have got 10 paper mills across the country. And again, Counts is very unique in that we make a very high quality, high strength paper that's used for very heavy things to be shipped in. So we have to use more virgin fiber, wood fiber to get the strength. Whereas other companies that make boxes to put like toilet paper or something in something's lighter, they can use a lot more recycled content. So we're a very niche market. That's why we have to use more virgin wood.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cawthorn?
Richard, I'm putting you on the spot. I hope with all the good recycling that you're doing at PCA, that you're supplying all the recycling data to your local solid waste director for his APR report.
I assure you, they relish our data, the amount of recycling that we do, that they certainly take that into account.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hastings?
With Amazon expanding the way they have for the last few years, what have you seen in an increase in recycled paper based on Amazon?
Tremendous is what I see. And I see that more from the local area, like the picture I had of the trailer there in Henderson County where we collect that. I know my local solid waste director says that over the last 5 years, 6 years, since COVID, basically, when people started staying at home and ordering everything off the internet, that he said, yeah, our cardboard generation has just increased considerably. So, yeah. And, you know, everybody I talk to, you know, they say something about, oh, yeah, I've got 14 boxes in my garage right now I've got to do something with because my wife ordered everything off of Amazon last week. So I think this is going to be a continuing issue as people continue to order more on the internet and have it delivered.
One of the other things that we've touched on in the other presentations is an education piece of what
Absolutely.
can be recycled, what can't be. And I know for me personally, I've had attendants tell me that pizza boxes of any kind, whether it had a cooked pizza in it or a frozen pizza, did not matter, cannot be recycled. And I've called a vendor that actually takes that recycled box and says, we don't care.
That's true.
And I'm wondering, how does that information not get to the guy on the ground? He has been told, religiously, you cannot put a pizza box in this bin. And so somebody's beat it into him somehow. And I wonder what your experience there has been.
And again, I do not understand that. We take anything. Now, when we process it, there's probably 10 to 15% of the weight that we buy, the old cardboard, is things we can't use. I mean, it's cabbages, it's plastic, it's styrofoam, it's a lot of other stuff mixed in there. But as long as it's paper, just like the copy paper type, white paper, I mean, that's a high value thing, but we will take that just the same as anything else. It's fiber to us. So
it's good to know.
Pizza boxes does not matter.
Okay.
I assure you, when it goes through, I have seen the recycling process, and a little bit of pizza left in that box, cheese or whatever, makes no difference.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And I think the education that's what I was really getting at,
Yeah.
is so that everybody
is.
kind of knows the rules and the
Absolutely.
facts up front,
Absolutely.
and that gets conveyed all the way to the end user.
It
So,
does. It needs to be.
well, thank you again for coming and joining us
Okay.
today and bringing this,
Okay.
and appreciate you being available for follow-up.
Thank you for listening.
We are so close to our break for lunch. I don't want to rush the next presenter. So I'll open up for any comments if anyone has anything at this time. But our plan is to come back at 1:30 and start with the next presentation and additional discussions at that point. So entertain any discussion right now, or we can certainly adjourn a little bit early. Seeing no comments, we will stand adjourned till 1:30.